Okay, for this tutorial, I'm going to start at the end and delete a bunch of stuff and try go back to the beginning and see if we can work our way back up. So I have a student that's doing a modeling project and they want to add, it's kind of a derelict church cabin-y thing, and want to fracture the glass, and also obviously put a little bit of wear and tear on the glass itself. So this is not meant to be like kind of a perfect solution. It's just kind of a quick setup. We're going to cover how to use a Voronoi fracture to break the glass, and then we'll look at how to use a shader. One thing here is I've added a dome light and brought in an HDR image just so I can have something to see how the material is working. You can see the fractures. You can also see hopefully these areas where I've used a noise texture to put a little bit of to control the amount of blurriness in the scene. So there's a little bit of blur on the glass and more here, right? So it looks like it has something on it. It's not clean. I've also tweaked the material so that it is not totally transparent. We're picking up a little bit of color in the glass. So anyways, we'll see if we can get right back to something close to this. So for now, I'm just going to turn off the old redshift, and in fact, I'll put that dome in there, and let's just hide the stage. And I'm going to delete the glass that I created, and let's go ahead and create a cube. And I'm going to move this up here and flatten this out. Okay, so something like that. That's fine, and it can have be helpful sometimes. Other instances not, but probably not in this. But just out of habit here, I'm going to put a few subdivisions into the surface, so when it gets cut, I don't have big open stretches. I actually have some of these smaller polygons to deal with the shading. Okay, so that's fine. In fact, let's just, maybe what we'll do is create a camera here, and I'll just leave that in case we want to come back to it. And let's hide it from the viewport there. Okay, so I have this cube, and I need to break it apart, and Cinema 4D is great with this. Sorry, I'm looking at this, I'm like, maybe this should be just a little thinner. Okay. Maybe even that's too thick, but we'll see as we go along. I can always come back to that. Okay, so to break the glass, and in this, all I want to do is just have this system break it for me, create some patterns that I can kind of iterate through. I'm not interested in doing a physics simulation and putting the glass on the ground or any of these other things at this point. I just want to kind of break it a little bit and cause a little distress. So to do that, we're going to use a generator, and this generator actually is underneath the cloner section. So really what this is are a bunch of fragmented child clones of the cube itself. And the way Voronoi works, so first thing, all I need to do is just take the object that I want it to work on and put it into the generator. And ta-da, right, I already have some sections in here, right, these shards, which is okay, right? It's artistic, maybe in a sense, computer generated, but it's not really giving me the art directed look that I want. But what it does is it creates random points on the surface, and then it creates a boundary around those points. So the points are created here just randomly. There are so many ways I could use a different object. I could use a curve, things, but we're just going to go to the source tab, and if I click on the point generator, you can see these are the random points that it created. If I crank this up, right, you can see these are all the other points. Probably don't want to use that in this instance, right? So let's just say 20. And this is uniform, right? So all the shards, but really if something breaks, right, it's because something maybe hit it locally in a certain area. So again, with the Voronoi selected, I'm going to the point source that it created, and there's so many different ways to do this, but I don't want the distribution type of these random points to be uniform. I want them to basically be skewed to one place or another. And right now you can define it per the axis. So do I want this on the X, Y, Z? So here you can say it's shifting this to one side, right? So I'm going to say I want it actually on the negative Y, which just means not as many here and there's more up here. I really like that, right? So I'm getting somewhere, but I don't want it perfectly in the corner. I want it to, I don't know, there's an old Western scene, right? Like a bullet went through there, something like that. So then I have this transform tab where I can offset how this random distribution, where it sits, right? So let me just tweak that a little bit. If I get to the point I like it. The other thing too is I can change the number of points, right? If I feel like I need more in here, call that good. And if I like what this is, but I want to see new variations of that, I have a seed generator, right? Let's go back one. I really liked that one. That seems perfect to me, because then what I want to do is maybe delete a couple of these shards that are in between, leave some openings there. Maybe there's some other little ways I could deal with that, but that looks, I'm kind of gonna go with that. And it's also maybe similar to what I had before. I could add a new source, like I could put this one here, and again do the exponential and move it along, but I'm not going to do that, so let's just remove that. Let's just keep with one. All right, so it's important to note that on this source setup here, we do have the inside, so it's generating polygons internally for the fracture, which is exactly what we want. And let's, so all I need to do now is, in essence, make the object editable, right? Right now I just have these pieces that are selected here. What I want to do is just, at this point, collapse them all down into objects. So if I just right-click on the Voronoi and go current state to object, right? It's going to create a duplicate with all the shards in there, right? There's a whole bunch of them. So at this point, I'm not going to delete it, but I'm just going to hide the Voronoi generator just in case I want to come back. Down the road, I don't like what I have. I can generate a new one or make some changes to it. The other thing, I don't want to get in all the detail, but it's created all these little point tags in here that we don't need as part of the generation. So I'm just going to draw a window around those various tags for these objects and delete them. They're helpful if you're doing simulations or other things, but we don't need that. The last thing about this is you can see the coloring. Let's see if my stage is still in there. Oh, where is my stage is hidden, sorry. There we go. So you can see my object is in there and it is maintaining the coloring that's on top of it. In fact, I'm going to delete that material. So let's just say I create just a new one right off the bat. Right, so it will color it, this will overlap it. If you do get to the point where you don't like the coloring that's in there, you can select these objects and underneath the basic tab for each of these polygons, we can say instead of displaying this custom attribute, you can just be what the material is. But for now, I'll leave it there just so we can identify our shards as we're moving along. I have set this up so that there's in the stage, there's a plane object that's set to catch shadows and things like that, but not be visible. So that's how this is set up with the on the little snow and the HDR image that's in there. Okay, so I have this little colored map. Let's turn this off. So that's all fine and dandy. Let's hide the stage again for a second. But I need to go in there and select the pieces that I don't want and just get rid of them or hide them is the easiest thing to do. Multiple ways I could go about doing that, but for me, I'm gonna be in object mode with a little move tool. I'm just gonna select the pieces that let's make sure I have this here. Yeah, So I want that one to go away, and that one, that one, that one. Okay, so I have a bunch of these that I've selected. I'm just going to right click and group those selected objects, and I'll put this within my little Voronoi and hide it. Right, just so I can get through like, well, which ones do I need? Which ones do I, which is nice because then I can just kind of art direct how these sit in there, right? And the whole idea is, like maybe these, these broken out, you've less some of these shards, so many different things. I could even go into edit mode for something like this and drag the points over, but I think I'm pretty good with this, right? If I wanted to break it out some more, but I think this will do what we want. Okay, so I've got the broken glass. This one is isolated by itself, right? With the idea that it could be hanging in the frame, right? So that's why it can float like an island. So I think that'll be fine. So at this point I can just hide those, right? I'm not using them. And these are the fragments I'm going to work on. And I could modify or displace those or lots of different things. So, but for now we'll just leave that, and let's move on to the idea of material. And because that's going to be a big part of this. Right now I just have these gaps. So what I want to do is build that glass material. So underneath create, redshift materials, I'm going to use the standard, try to use that all the time. And I'm just going to double click on that and bring it up in the node editor. And I'm just going to be using this one material. So I've got the node editor, and I'm going to dock it over here so that I can work on it while I'm looking at, oops, there we go, while I'm looking at some of these renders. Okay, so the material, it's going to be glass, right? So instead of just using the preset, I'll do this from scratch. So it needs to be transparent, so I don't want any of the diffuse quality whatsoever. I do want the reflections on here, and I do want the transmission, right? So I do want this to be glass. And, oh, I guess I need to assign this over onto our object. Okay, so it's in there. Let's move around so we can see what's going on here. Right, and this is why it was helpful to have at least some scene. Maybe my student probably at this point already has their room and their lights and everything set up. So, but I didn't have any geometry in here, and I needed to see what it's doing. Between the render engine and my screen capture, it's trying to have a hard time. Okay, so you can see it's really frosted, right? It's really blurry, and that's because underneath the roughness, it's set to 20%, right? So if I turn this all the way up, it's basically going to be so rough that it won't be transparent. It's going to look solid, right? It takes a second to update. And if I move this roughness all the way down to 0, I'll let it update here. With that big HDR image in there, it takes a little bit to get going. You can see that it's perfectly clear. So we're going to come back to that the weight of the reflection, right? The roughness of the reflection. Just keep in mind that 0, if it were to translate to a color value, would be black, and 1 would be fully white. The one thing that I want to do is maybe the transmission is not perfect. By that I mean it's not perfectly clear. I'm even going to just give it a little bit of a bluish green tint, a little bit. Too much. So let's turn that weight up there, and let's pull that back. It's actually good. I think that you saw that it's very easy to get this to be too much. Yeah, that's better. I still think that's just too much color there. I just want the tiniest bit. Okay, that's feeling a little bit better to me. I just want ever so slightly. I just don't want it to be just perfectly clear. All right, so I've given a little bit of color. I think that will help. You could, if you wanted to get into it, to use the subsurface settings to make it absorb a little bit of light. I'm not going to go to that extent. I'll just leave it here. We can see that I have some cracks that are in there. And let's go back to the kind of comparison camera, right? So already this is pretty good, right? I feel like if you wanted to, you could just stop here. But I want to add just one more little detail. Again, you could use an image here, but I'm just going to try to use Cinema 4D's, one of its noise textures, to just rough up the surface just a little bit more. Turn the redshift off for a second, and I'm going to go up and add noise. And I'm going to take this noise and run it into the roughness that's on that surface. Let's see what happens here. Right, so you can see pretty intense. It has a lot of roughness. Now, part of that is because, remember, white is 100% in that. Oh, in fact, I just used this, got the wrong noise. Let's use the max on noise, not the redshift one. There we go. Roughness, there we go. Right, same thing. You can see like where the little splotches are. There's so many different ways we could look at this in these values here. So black right now is seeing right through, like it's totally transparent. All this white is where it's just 100% or close to 100% rough, right? It's creating that. Maybe a quick way to look at this is we could invert these values. I could make this the white, and did I do that right? Just need my redshift to update here. There we go. So how I play with these materials and what the distribution of the texture on there, if I hit the S underneath the shading, you can see kind of what it's doing, right? So again, remember black is nothing. This gray would be 69% rough, right? So I can turn that down. I'm also going to work with the scale. Oh, this is one thing I wanted to show. Let's do this. So what is happening here, in fact, let's make it larger, 10. The shading here, it's kind of dark at the top, right? And a lot of these, there's this gradient, but it's not the same on the other side. So this is really important. The input here, instead of object, if you're going to use a Maxon noise texture here, I don't want it to be calculated per object, right? All the different shards. I want it to be calculated across the world, because if this was a pane of glass, right, it would have this texture on it, and then it would be fractured, but it would already have that consistent, fingerprints or whatever that would be on there across the pieces, right? They need to span the gaps, so to speak. I can play with the low and the high clip here to try to make it a little less blurriness, I guess, between those edges. Oops, let's do this one here. So that's fine. This is not going to be as nice as what the first render is, but I want you to just see how this might work together. Instead of noise, let's use something like turbulence, or what was the one I tried before? Okay, so that looks pretty good. So where it's black here, I'm not going to get any roughness, and wherever it's gray, I'm going to get whatever that percentage is, right? So this says 50%. What if I went to the black and actually said, you know, how about it's older glass, so I'm going to make it a little blurry in the clear portions of the glass and more blurry wherever those little specks are. Oops. And let me turn off the solo, right? So instead of previewing just the texture itself, I want to see the full material with all its little stuff going on. Okay, so not bad. You can see these little sections here where it's kind of rough. You know, I'm just using the noise texture. I would probably blend these together. And there's lots of other things that I might try. And we'll let that kind of resolve a little bit and be a little smoother. So it just depends on how much distress you want on that surface, how much you want to crank these values up. Maybe I just want this to be more subtle, right? Just so it's not the same. Oops, did that take? Yeah, that was pretty good. Right, just so that I have some imagery on there. Okay, 21 minutes. I think that covers all of it. Again, this could be taken to, depends on what you're trying to do, but if you're just trying to just break out some windows, the windows in the front, and you've got this whole giant scene, don't fuss with this too much. Just get a little bit in there, mess with the material a little bit. We've already got the shards kind of doing some stuff for us, which I think is kind of nice. Yeah, so I think that we'll just let this kind of do its last little run through. Oops, come back to me here, a little image. And obviously, because it's glass, looking at it at different angles is pretty important, right, to see what it's doing. All right, I'll call that good. A little over my 15-minute time limit, but I hope this helps.